Reading is taken from Matthew chapter 11, verses 28. Make sure I got the verses right. 28 to 30. That's Matthew chapter 11, verses 28, 29, and 30. And it says, "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." The words of Jesus as written in Matthew. May the Lord's blessing be upon this portion of his word that we just read.
Well, good morning, everyone. As Daryl mentioned, a little dicey drive here this morning. It's funny with, well, not funny, but interesting with rain. When it comes down, you get lulled into thinking everything's okay, and then all of a sudden you hit a puddle at highway speed and takes you all over the place. And whereas I think when the roads are a bit icy, then you just drive and a little bit more cautiously all along. But sometimes when it's raining like this, it gets a little, like I said, a little dicey. And not everyone seems to drive according to the road conditions, do they? And people think that they have a bigger vehicle, they can just drive however they want. And so, yeah, there was a few accidents and things along the way, but we're glad to be here. And it's nice to be here a different time than just the summertime. I know that for Addison, she doesn't quite know the seasons yet, so she thinks coming up to Pugwash, she'll get a chance to go swimming. And then so she doesn't realize that, we can't swim up here all year long, right? And so it's a little bit different for her to get used to that. So thankful to Daryl this morning. I messaged him the first thing this morning. I was getting ready and I was listening to a song, and I thought, well, this would be appropriate for the start of the message this morning. And the song is by a popular Christian group, Mercy Me, and the song is entitled "Even If." And I thought this really goes along with what I wanted to say this morning. And so the song starts off by saying, "They say sometimes you win some, sometimes you lose some, and right now I'm losing bad." And my phone is responding here. Okay.
Here's Sometimes Love.
I have Siri on my phone, and I never know when it's going to talk. I don't have it so that it's supposed to chime back to me, and then sometimes I'm teaching in my class, and all of a sudden it starts talking to me, and the students think it's hilarious. So I'll shut it off so that it won't bother us now. And right now I'm losing bad. And I don't know about you, but I think those first three lines describe my life a lot of times. You feel like you're having more losses than you are having wins, and so the writer of this song, one of the members of the group, he goes on to describe what they experience sometimes as Christian leaders who are going and trying to spread the love of God through music. And he says, "I've stood on the stage night after night, reminding the broken, you'll be all right, but right now, I just can't." And I think, again, that's something that all of us as Christians go through. We know that we have the hope in Jesus, but sometimes life really seems to tip the balance, so it feels like we intellectually know that we have this hope in Jesus, but the situations that we're going through, it seems like we're not feeling that right now. It's easy to sing when there's nothing to bring me down, but what will I say when I'm held to the flame like I am right now? I know you're able, and I know you can, save through the fire with your mighty hand. But even if you don't, my hope is in you alone. They say it only takes a little faith to move a mountain. And so we can see that transition that he's identifying that, life is really getting me down. This is really tough, but I know that you can save me through the fire. But even if you don't, my hope is in you alone. Well, good thing, a little faith is all I have right now. But God, when you choose to leave the mountains unmovable or give me the strength to be able to sing, it is well within my soul. I know you are able, and I know you can save through the fire with your mighty hand. But even if you don't, my hope is in you alone. I know the sorrow, I know the hurt will all go away if you just say the word. But even if you don't, my hope is in you alone. And you can see that near the end of the song, he transitions to, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. And I thought this was interesting when we're talking about discouragement this morning. The title of the sermon is Do Not Be Discouraged, because it's something that all of us go through. And how do we face it as Christians who know that Jesus is going to come again at some point in time? We don't know when, and he's going to restore the balance. Things are going to be good. As I said in the prayer, we're not going to have our prayer lists anymore. We're not going to need to be mindful of so many people that are suffering and which causes our heart to break. We're not going to have that experience. But while we're going through our life now, how do we stay balanced through discouragement? Well, our church, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, is certainly not immune to it. We've gone through several periods of time where major things have happened. And many of you who have studied the history of the church know that in 1888, our church was in a little bit of a low point. We had been around for about 25 years up to that point in time, and things were moving along. And people from the Adventist Church were known as people of the book. But unfortunately, that wasn't necessarily always a positive for them. Many people took this and became arrogant and proud of this understanding of the Bible. And in those days, there wasn't a lot of entertainment. And so one of the things that people did for fun is they would get together and have debates and things like that. So they'd find, depending on the speaker, they would possibly fill up the largest hall, the largest church, and they'd have this debate. And so oftentimes the Adventist preachers would challenge other people to have this kind of debate over the Bible. And oftentimes these pastors would win, but unfortunately it didn't do anything for the cause of Christ. It didn't bring people to Jesus. It just kind of was a thing where, well, I'm right and you're wrong, and it wasn't the sort of thing that we know that we should be doing and working with a softer heart. Certainly Jesus could have gone in and told people that they're wrong and have these debates, but that wasn't his way. His way was to help people, and then they would follow him. But through this whole experience in 1888, we see these two pioneers, Jones and Wagner, preach righteousness by faith. And it was a good thing because it turned the church around and got us going in a different direction and on a positive direction. But they faced a lot of conflict within the church and led up to this 1888 General Conference session. And both these men had to battle the church establishment because they didn't feel that that salvation was as easy as they were portraying it to be. And fortunately, they had Ellen White on their side, But as, again, those of us who've studied this, we realize that she took a lot of heat for this as well, and the leadership were against her. Some say, because of this, this is the reason why she ended up in Australia. They wanted to get rid of her. They wanted to move her along. Let's get her kind of out of the way a little bit so that we can have a bit of peace and we can carry things on the way we know it to be. But Jones and Wagner, I've read different opinions and have heard people say different things to me about this, but from what I could study, they became discouraged through all this conflict and all this battling for what they believed to be right. And eventually, they didn't leave the faith as far as believing in the Seventh-day Adventist message, but they certainly, both of them went off on different paths and were not what they once were. Some things I've read that they got caught up with Kellogg a little bit, and his theology that was a little bit off from what we believe, and they their ability to do all the amazing things that they did seemed to vanish a little bit. And so why is it that discouragement through all this, why is it that it had that sort of effect on these two men who were so strong for the Lord? Ellen White, even though she faced the same sort of discouragement, and like I said, some believe that she was shipped off because of her support for these two, she had a different approach, and she had a different result from her discouragement. After these events, over the next 17 years, she went on to write Steps to Christ, Thoughts from the Mount of Blessing, The Desire of Ages, Christ Object Lessons, Ministry of Healing. And so for her, her discouragement turned into something so beautiful and wonderful, and wrote these amazing books that we have now to get to know more about Jesus. And so interesting how one takes it to kind of to go off on their own on a sort of misguided theology, or two people do, and then Ellen White goes off on here. And why is it? Why is it that discouragement does that to us? I also, another story that that I've been involved with is that I know three people that I went to university with. They finished university, got married, and things seemed to be going really well in their professional lives, only to have two of them have situations where their wives had an affair on them. And another guy who was getting set up in a medical career and doing very well financially, have his wife change as soon as they got married, and it appeared that she was marrying him simply to soak him for all his money. And two of these people, because of the situation, became so discouraged that they ended up blaming God for their problems, their predicaments. And one did not. And again, why is it that some of us, through our discouragement, get closer to the Lord? And why is it that some run away and leave? And I think it's important to understand and think about discouragement, because it's something that all of us experience at one time or another, isn't it? We all, as Christians, that's one of the unifying things, that it's not all just this amazing relationship with God all the time and we feel close to Him. We have these peaks and valleys throughout our relationship. And so it's important for us to understand why and what we can do with that discouragement. There are many different texts in the Bible that we can turn to. And I didn't want to inundate you with a whole pile, but it's amazing. You just have to go and do a search for biblical texts on discouragement, and the amount of results that you get is amazing. But I wanted for us this morning just to focus on three, and look at three that we can talk about. And so the first one I wanted us to look at was Isaiah 41:10. And so if you would turn with me to Isaiah 41:10, that would be great. Isaiah 41:10. And it says, "Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. Yes, I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." And so, one of the things we'll see, as we well know, this is not a really insightful point, but it doesn't say in the Bible that if we're closer to God, we'll be immune from trouble, does it? It doesn't say that anywhere. And so I think some Christians who have done a lot of damage for the sake of Christianity have talked about this prosperity gospel, this, well, if you're really with God, that good things are going to happen to you. And so we know that kind of philosophy, that kind of theology is so damaging, because then obviously the conclusion is, when things go bad, which they will, that you must not be close to God. There's something wrong with your relationship with Him, or God doesn't truly love you. And that is so satanic, isn't it? Because that is not, that's what the devil wants us to believe. That's not how the Lord wants us to think or to believe. We are promised in verses like this that through our discouragement and difficult times, that God will be with us, and He will be our strength to get through our situation. And that, to me, is a much more peaceful thing. Not that we won't go through bad times, but when we do, and we will go through them, that He will be with us, and He will give us strength even though we don't think we have it. And so it's an amazing promise. Let's look at Psalms 34, 17 to 19. Psalms 34, 17 to 19. So it says, "The righteous cry out, and the Lord hears, and delivers them out of all their troubles. The Lord is near to those who have a broken heart, and saves such as have a contrite spirit." And it's interesting when it says He delivers them out of all their troubles. We have to be careful with that one as well, don't we, and understand it in the context. That when we're in the midst of something, it doesn't mean that we're going to be plucked out of the situation and everything is going to be great in the moment, does it? It means that we will be ultimately delivered from our troubles. One day we will not have trouble, and so we will be delivered out of them. But there are times that we're in situations that we're in the midst of, and we don't feel or sense any sort of deliverance, do we? Things are not getting better in the moment. But ultimately, God hears us and will deliver us from these troubles. In verse 18, "The Lord is near to those who have a broken heart." And I love that thought, that He's near to us when we have a broken heart. No matter whether we feel abandoned by everyone around us, the Lord is near with when our heart is broken. And He saves such that have a contrite spirit. And it's interesting because you'll hear a lot of people talk about, well, why does the Lord let these things happen? Why, if God is all-powerful, why does He let cancer take the lives of people? Why do we see children die prematurely? Why do we see loved ones who were faithful to the Lord? Why do they die when they're so faithful? Why do these things happen? And believe me, I as well have had friends who have died. Those of you who know Dale Bennett. He was at our wedding and stood in our wedding, and a week later he dies in a motorcycle accident. And we saw him one morning. We go back to Calgary the next morning, and and then get this awful phone call that he died the next day, all within like a couple weeks of our wedding and him being in our wedding. And that's one thing I cannot understand. Some things you can look back and you reflect and you say, okay, I understand, Lord, why it happened. But that's one thing that I just don't understand. I can never, to this day, many years after, can't figure it out what the purpose of that. And so we have these situations, and people will criticize God or criticize Christianity in general and say, well, why would a good and righteous God let these bad things happen? But sometimes we don't have an answer for that, but we see here that when the righteous cry out, the Lord hears. And there are many people who could care less about God, and so they're not part of the righteous, are they? They're not speaking to him, and so the Lord is saying, well, I respect your decision. You don't want anything to do with me, so when you're crying out, I'm there, I'm right there, but you're not asking for my help. And so you're not going to feel the same sort of peace through these situations that the righteous, the people who are choosing him and choosing to be with him. Let's look at our memory text, or not memory text, our scripture reading, Matthew 11, 28 to 30. And this one is a lot more familiar to us, I would say. The other ones are as well, but this one is, as far as discouragement texts, this is probably right up there as being one of the most popular and familiar. Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And Jesus will give us rest, but it's not perpetual rest, is it? We'll still go through hard times. And when we think of Jesus providing healing, just because he healed someone didn't mean that they were forever healed, right? He got them out of situations and used it for a specific purpose. But people still died around him. Not everyone was healed. Not everyone was free from sickness. Not everyone was brought back from death. And so Jesus used these things as a specific purpose. And so sometimes, unfortunately, through our pain, there's a purpose behind it we're allowed to experience that. And we don't understand it. And like I said with my story a minute ago, we may never understand it. It may never make sense to us in this lifetime. But that's one of the things the good things that we'll be able to ask the Lord, why? Why did this happen? I don't understand it. It didn't make sense. It brought so much pain. What's going on? Why did it happen? But he promises that he will give us rest and perpetual rest, and that we will understand it at one point in time, even when we don't right now. And when we follow Christ, as these verses say, we still carry a burden, don't we? There's still burdens that we carry, but he promises that the burdens will be light. And one of the things I think that we can think about when we go through these things that are really bad, we're like, well, I'm not feeling any light burden right now. This is really tough what I'm going through. I don't understand it, Lord. Why am I going through this? I'm just so discouraged with what I'm going through. And so we still experience these burdens, but we can always go back to he died for us, and because of his death, we will be free from sin at one point in time. And that, I hope, gives us encouragement while we are going through a bad time that is causing us so much discouragement. And I said to you earlier that there's a lot of verses in the Bible that talk about discouragement, and we can go to help us through discouraging times. But like I said, he doesn't promise that he'll deliver us from the bad times. He promises that he'll be with us, doesn't he? We can always cling to that no matter what happens, he will be with us. But he does promise something which seems kind of strange from the surface, or maybe from a non-believer. But he promises us things like joy, rest, comfort, help, strength, and sometimes deliverance in life when we read these discouragement verses. And we will have, as I said, the deliverance once Jesus comes again. But while we are going through a lot of these things, we're experiencing death, sickness, financial worries, relationship or job issues, we don't always experience the joy, rest, comfort, strength all at the same time. These are different experiences that we have. I'm not sure that I've ever experienced joy in amongst some bad times that have been happening in my life. But I have experienced comfort, I have experienced help, I have experienced strength, but joy is not one that I can say, well, I went through this and, I experienced joy. When you're in the midst of if someone was going through, bankruptcy or sickness or divorce, I can't say that they would honestly feel joy in the midst of it. But certainly comfort, help, strength, deliverance, and through that the Lord promises. The person that was in my story that I mentioned of the 3 people who had marriages fall apart, the one that stayed with the Lord, and when his spouse left him, he pleaded and in prayer for deliverance, so that the heartbreak of the experience would go away and that his spouse would return. Prayer did not bring joy, rest, or deliverance for him, as he had to chart a new path in life. However, his prayers did bring him comfort in amongst his heartache. And one of the interesting things, that if you were to talk to this person and you were to ask him years later after the incident if the Lord provided, he would say that the Lord, in amongst it all, was faithful and true. Because after the relationship falling apart, he was able to experience situations in life that he never would have been able to experience had he stayed in that relationship. And so, even though it didn't have to happen and was unnecessary, he was able to experience these things. And so God was amazing through it all and through this bad time. And as I examine my own life, I'm ashamed to admit that I learn and grow the most when there is struggle. I feel healthy, or I feel the healthiest when I push through and exercise or eat things that are better for me than the bad things that I desire to eat, or the sitting around doing nothing that I feel like I want to do rather than get fresh air and get some exercise. When I work hard to complete a goal, I feel better by having to work hard doing it. So I unfortunately cling to God the most when I go through struggles rather than when the path is smooth and straight. And I would love to say that my relationship is always even-keeled, even through the good times, but unfortunately it's not. It seems that I need the challenging times to prod me to get onto my knees to cling to Him. And I think discouragement is so normal for us. I would say that our Lord and Savior experienced discouragement in His time, and there was no one more connected to the Father than Him. I would say that the disciples certainly experienced discouragement during their time on earth, didn't they? Jesus was not the Messiah they were looking for at the time, initially. And when He died, that would have turned their world upside down because they didn't understand it. That didn't make sense to them. And yet, every single disciple, through all the discouragement, stayed with Jesus except Judas, didn't they? In fact, they were so committed to Him that as history tells us, that it's believed that all but one died a martyr. Peter was crucified upside down. Andrew was crucified. Thomas was pierced by spears. Philip, they just say, was cruelly put to death. Matthew, some say, was stabbed to death. Bartholomew martyred. James stoned, then clubbed to death. Matthias burned. Simon the Zealot, and I guess it was two that died of natural causes, as Simon and John. And despite most of them dying cruelly, were they abandoned by God? Some would say, well, obviously, if they were going to die that way and they were followers of Christ, why would they be killed like that? They must have been abandoned. No, as our verses stated, he would have been with them and provided strength throughout when they needed it most. This topic of how to navigate discouragement is not one, and it's a difficult sermon from the fact that it's not one that we can just tie a nice little bow around it and say, this is all you have to do to be, when you're discouraged. You just have to do this and everything will be okay. We can't do that, can we? We can't talk like that, and it's not the reality. And so I don't have easy solutions for our problems. And furthermore, I think that when we do that sometimes, we cause more damage than we do help, don't we? Oh, just pray a little bit more. Just have a bit more faith. And those little solutions don't really help us when we're in the midst of sickness and discouragement because of our sickness or our problems. I've heard things like, have more faith, get on your knees and pray about it, or this situation is building your character for eternity. Tough. Doesn't necessarily help the person and get us to where they need to be, or get us to where we need to be. But one of the things I can say about this is that when you or someone you love are going through tough times, I encourage you to look back and reflect on how the Lord has led you in the past. How have you gotten through the situations? What are the good things that have come out of that situation? Because I believe those are the things that bring you encouragement when you are discouraged and in the midst of your situation. As I said, this person reflected and realized that, hey, if I would have stayed in that relationship, if it wasn't taken away from me, I wouldn't have been able to experience all these things. And so the Lord has certainly provided, because I've had to go down this path instead of this path that I was originally intending on going. And so, despite it doesn't make the pain any better, it didn't help the situation when he was in it, but now he can see this new path. And I also think, as hard as it is, if we can find things situations where we can praise God through what we're going through, or be thankful for the things that we are. In our song here, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. As we started off this song, it didn't sound like it was well in his soul, did it? When he started off, he's saying, hey, I'm coming out and I'm singing every night and supposed to be talking about the love of God and be really positive and be a positive Christian, but I'm just not experiencing it. I'm not feeling it right now. I'm really in a tough situation. But through the song, he works it out and realizes that I might not have deliverance. I might not be out of the situation, but it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. And I think that that reflection and that praise and that thankfulness is the only way that I have witnessed and I have observed in my own life, observed in others and observed in my own life. That's the only way to navigate these situations. And it's not a false praise. It's not like, oh, just be happy and be thankful. But no, if we can start thinking about the things that God is doing in our lives and be thankful for them, I think it turns the narrative around, doesn't it? And it doesn't, maybe we don't see all the things that are negative. We've all heard the stories of people going through difficult times and how they're able to get through them. And we study in the New Testament people that are thrown in jail. We can think about Paul, can't we? And how many times he went through tough situations. And is there ever a situation where we read that he was discouraged while imprisoned? We don't, do we? We see them singing, we see in the disciples, we see them singing, and we see them praising through. And so I think there's something in that for us, that not a false praise, not a be fake, but if we can realize that the Lord is faithful and true, and it is well in my soul, I think that is how we can navigate these tough times in our lives. And so I just pray for you and ask you to pray for me as we experiencing these things and as we navigate these things in life, that we can keep ourselves or keep each other close and be concerned and keep each other in prayer so that we can say, it is well with my soul. Our closing hymn is number 476, Burdens Are Lifted at Calvary.
Jesus is very near.